chandelier's light sparkled like frozen stars over the grand dining hall of the Bellevue Club, a sanctuary for the city's elite. Every night, power, wealth, and vanity gathered here to feast. But tonight the air was thicker than usual, charged with tension that hadn't yet found its voice. At the center of it all was Richard Delancey, a self-made billionaire with a sharp tongue and an unrelenting thirst for control. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of Chateau Margaux, his piercing eyes scanning the room for his next amusement. That's when he noticed her. She was slender, poised, and working with precision as she cleared plates. Her dark skin gleamed under the golden light, and her braided hair was pulled neatly into a bun. Unlike the other waitstaff, she didn't avoid eye contact or rush her movements. There was a quiet grace to her, one that intrigued him. "Waitress," he called, his voice slicing through the hum of conversation. Naomi froze, gripping the tray in her hands. Every patron turned to look, and even the other servers paused mid-step. The billionaire rarely addressed anyone directly unless he had a point to prove. She approached cautiously, keeping her head high but her gaze steady. "Yes, sir." "Is there something you need?" Richard smirked. "Entertainment, perhaps. This evening has been dull." He glanced toward the grand piano in the corner, a Steinway that had been silent for weeks. "Do you play?" Naomi's chest tightened. "No, sir. I'm just here to serve." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Everyone claims they're just here to serve, yet everyone here is hiding something. A talent, a secret, a story. You strike me as someone who's hiding quite a bit. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," she replied firmly. His smirk widened. "Let's test that theory, shall we? Play something, just one song." Her eyes darted to the piano. Memories she had buried long ago clawed their way to the surface. Her mother's soft hums, the way her fingers used to dance on the keys, the applause she'd received at the church recitals. But those days felt like another life. "I really can't," Naomi said, her voice quieter now. Richard's expression darkened. "I wasn't asking." The room fell silent. Guests whispered behind half-raised hands, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. The manager started to intervene, but Richard silenced him with a cold glance. "Go on," Richard said, leaning back again, "unless you'd rather find work elsewhere." "Okay." Naomi's heart pounded. She had bills to pay, siblings to support, and no other job lined up. Humiliation burned in her chest, but she couldn't afford pride right now. Slowly, she set down her tray and walked to the piano, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The room seemed to hold its breath as she sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. They felt foreign now, like tools she no longer knew how to use. "Any day now," Richard drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. Naomi closed her eyes, exhaling shakily, and then she pressed a key. The sound was hesitant at first, a single note trembling in the air, but as her hands began to move, the melody found its footing. It wasn't a song from the dining hall's usual repertoire of classical pieces. It was a gospel tune, raw and emotional. The notes spilled out like a confession, carrying years of pain, struggle, and resilience. The transformation was immediate. The diners, who had expected a clumsy attempt, were spellbound. Naomi's playing wasn't just skilled, it was powerful. It told a story that demanded to be heard. And as for Richard, he was frozen, his smirk long gone. The room was silent except for the sound of Naomi's music. Each note she played dug deeper into the hearts of those listening, weaving a tapestry of emotion that no one had expected. The raw, haunting beauty of her performance was a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her, and yet it felt as if the music had always belonged there. Richard Delancey sat rigid in his chair, the glass of wine forgotten in his hand. His sharp eyes were locked on Naomi, but they were no longer filled with smug amusement. Instead, there was something softer, confusion, perhaps even vulnerability. Naomi's fingers flew across the keys, faster now, as if releasing years of suppressed pain and joy. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, urging her forward. Play like the world is listening, Naomi. Play for those who can't. The final chords rang out like a benediction, and then there was silence. For a moment, no one moved. The diners, the waitstaff, even the kitchen staff peeking through the door, all seemed frozen in time. Then the applause began, hesitant at first but quickly building into thunderous claps and cheers. Naomi stood slowly, her hands trembling as she smoothed her apron. She didn't look at Richard as she stepped away from the piano, walking back to her tray. "Naomi!" Richard's voice cut through the applause. She stopped but didn't turn around. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his tone quieter now, lacking the sharp edge it had held before. She turned to face him, her expression calm but unreadable. "My mother taught me," she said simply, "before she passed." Something flickered in Richard's eyes, a shadow of an old wound. "You should be playing for the world, not working here." Naomi's lips curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "Not everyone gets to choose their path, Mr. Delancey. Some of us just survive." The words hung in the air like an accusation, though Naomi had spoken them without malice. Richard stared at her, his usual quick reports lost somewhere in the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black card, holding it out to her. "Take this. Call my assistant tomorrow. I'll make sure you have the resources to share your talent with the world." Naomi hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Why?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be wasted. And maybe—" He paused, the words catching in his throat before he forced them out. "Maybe because I owe you for proving me wrong." Naomi stared at the card, her mind racing. She wanted to reject it, to walk away and leave him to his wealth and guilt, but her mother's voice echoed in her heart again. "Play like the world is listening." She reached out and took the card, slipping it into her pocket. "Thank you," she said softly, her tone neutral. Richard nodded once, then stood and walked toward the door, leaving a stack of crisp bills on the table without a word. As he disappeared into the night, Naomi glanced back at the piano. Her fingers still tingled, her heart still raced. For the first time in years, she felt the spark of possibility, like the world might be listening after all. But whether Richard Delancey's offer was a blessing or a trap remained to be seen.